Welcome to today's webinar entitled, Who's Ready to Test? Here is how the ACG Building System Commissioning Guideline defines ready. My name's Billy Zadig, Manager for Special Programs at APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage under the Continuous Learning tab later today. Professional continuing education certificates are being offered for today's program. Those who indicated they wanted a certificate at registration and meet the requirements will receive certificates later this afternoon. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by our presenter. Before we get started today, I would like to introduce our speaker. Charles W. Jackson III has 20 years of commissioning and electrical engineering experience and is currently with CMTA located in Arlington, Virginia. A graduate of Drexel University, he was named in 2022 Top 40 Under 40 for Consulting Specifying Engineers magazine and currently serves on the board of directors for ACG. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to our speaker for today's webinar. Charles, take it away.
Thanks, Billy, for the introduction, and thank you, everybody, for joining me for this presentation. So, like she said, about 20 years in the industry, and I've provided commissioning services on pretty much every sector. Let's go the next slides. These are continuing education, so make sure that you're registered. So let's go with the course description. And our goal today is kind of to explain ready to testing. It's a different meaning for everybody. Some people, contractors might look at it as one thing. Owners look at it another way. Me as a commissioning provider, I look at it a certain way. And our goal is kind of try to standardize and try to get everybody to the same accord. And one of the goals through that ACG Building Systems Commissioning Guideline is, show you definitive milestones that are needed for ready to testing. And like I said, the guideline also provides excellent resources for owners, contractors, and the rest of the commissioning team to educate and guide our industry in delivering better building systems. So not only for ready to testing, but the guideline kind of goes through the whole commissioning process and gives specific examples through different systems. And we'll get into that a little further. For the biggest learning objective that I hope that you get at the end of this presentation is how does ACG define ready for testing, establishing the difference between ready for testing and ready for commissioning, ready for testing examples for systems and educational facilities, and examples of consequences of not being ready for testing in educational facilities. So let's get started. A little bit about the ACG Building Systems Guideline. I'm a member of the Guideline Committee. I provided a couple articles on the lighting controls, and it's a volunteer organization of commissioning professionals from all walks of life who want to better the industry. The goal is to describe the process and leverage the collective knowledge to provide details of common systems we deal with in the industry. And the next steps are to take it further and get more into like energy initiatives. So one of the cool things about the guidelines is for building owners, it's free. It's free. So our goal is to kind of educate the industry and just allow everyone to get as much information as possible and hopefully to help standardize the process. So those are some of the biggest takeaways from the ACG Building System Guideline. And it's not static. It's a dynamic guideline that's always growing to stay relevant with the industry. So what's the biggest difference? Ready for testing versus ready for commissioning. I hear these two phrases all the time. And like I said, and both of these are very important, but the goal is to get everyone on the same page. I look at it a little simple, as like ready for commissioning is the process of commissioning, and it starts way back from inception of a project all the way to completion and you're into operation. where ready for testing describes that specific deliverable or that instant where you're actually testing the systems to verify the functionality. So in my opinion, you know, when you use ready for commissioning just for the testing purposes, it shortchanges the importance of the process and the need for the CX provider to be involved in every aspect of the project. So the goal is to get everyone on apples to apples, and it makes a big difference even in proposals or, you know, procurement, just getting the language of if you're requiring, you know, hey, we want testing here, or do we want, you know, commissioning. So within the CX guideline, we tried to help define what ready for testing is, and the goal was to help define, you know, what the CX provider like myself mean when I say ready for testing. You know, it's understood that it's a problem in the industry, and the guideline hopes to help standardize the phrase. And, you know, when to implement these prerequisites. The biggest problem can lead to wasted trips, double work, and misaligned expectations. There's been many times, you know, for me, that what I consider ready for testing drastically differs from what the contractor feels a piece of equipment is ready for testing. We try to document these requirements in the commissioning plan or even the commissioning specifications. Basically, the earlier the better. You know, if we can get in buy-in early, especially from, you know, facility managers, building owners, and the contractor during our commissioning kickoff meeting, you know, we can hope to head a lot of these problems off before we get actually to the testing portion. And unfortunately, you know, with schedule delays and as commissioning gets pushed further and further to the end, you know, there's always a rush to bypass some of these prerequisites and just get to testing. So our goal, hopefully by the end of this presentation, to see why that might not be such a great idea. And one of the cool things, and, you know, working throughout the industry, I've seen that ready for testing has taken a step further where they're requiring, you know, documentation, maybe the contractor to sign, I'm ready to test, or even to go through the functional testing procedure prior, you know, on their own to demonstrate that they are actually ready for testing. So those are just some different examples that I've seen going forward. So let's talk about ready for testing in part 2 of the guideline. I guess the section 4 of the HVAC section. We go over different topics as you see on the screen that we will plan. You know, that we're always looking to develop and grow, and, you know, we're constantly evolving to stay current with the industry. So the guideline has periodic updates and ever expanding subjects. So, you know, what might be relevant today might not be relevant in 5 years. So the goal is, you know, and that's why as a volunteer organization, we constantly bring in all commissioning professionals, or, you know, kind of anybody who has interest in subject matter expertise to help, you know, help with some of these articles to kind of continue to grow and, you know, make this guideline something that's useful throughout the industry. So let's talk, I guess, for essential plan. And, you know, these are some of the common criteria that will be needed before testing occur. You want to make sure first, you know, your HVAC system is installed in power. You know, everything, the labeling, the piping, the duct work is complete. You know, you want to make sure the checklists are actually complete and, you know, signed, dated, and submitted by the HVAC contractors. And, you know, also the system startup. A lot of times I've seen that, you know, right at startup, they want testing. But as you can see, there's still a couple of steps after the startup. You have your controls point-to-point verification, you know, sequence of operations, documentation has been completed, and tab procedures have been completed. And then also the tab report, not the full report, but the pencil copy. So these things, I know it might seem like additional paperwork, but these items help show that you know, the central plan is actually ready for testing and even trending. But two of the most things, if I can stress anything when it comes to HVAC, are your testing, adjusting, and balancing, your tab, and your point-to-point checkouts for controls. Like, I know every situation is unique, but one of the big things that I've seen in my experience to make or break when we're testing our mechanical and HVAC systems is whether the tab has been completed and completed successfully. Are we meeting those CFM guidelines? Are we meeting that design set point? Or, are we off? If we're already off, before we get the testing, then testing's not adding as much value. So being able to go through those reports and then your point-to-point checkout, making sure each point, corresponds to what's programmed in the system. And we've run through this many a times where the controls might come a little bit later in the process. So these are things for pretty much every piece of equipment. You need to make sure that that's ready, that they're ready. And speaking of controls, like, I can't stress enough the importance of controls nowadays, as controls are pretty much on every phase, almost every piece of equipment that you're going to test mechanically, and of course even electrically. But you want to make sure that that they're running through everything: system shutdown, safeties, your graphical, your GUI, your graphical user interface is complete, tested, and calibrated for functionality and accuracy. Your ancillary and auxiliary systems that are monitored by the HVAC control systems that have been tested to ensure proper operation, communication, and alarming capabilities. And alarms, make sure those alarms are checked to make sure, these things are already checked. When we come there, as a commissioning provider, this should not be the first time we're verifying some of the alarms. We're verifying some of the points. We're verifying those connections. And you also want to make sure that, the manufacturers, the checklists and all of those are completed as well. You want to make sure your head-end unit and everything, your system, the redundancy, anything with the controls is there and available. And like I said, I've dealt with companies that will not install the head-end unit until there's dedicated space to house the server and the workstation has a lockable door. So these are challenges that we want to make sure that are addressed prior to ready for testing. And a lot of times there's the urge to maybe test the equipment and the controls separately, and they function as one. And a lot of times when that happens, as the schedule gets pushed, controls might not come until after the building is in operation. So one of the big things is to focus on the controls, that we try to hammer that during the kickoff meeting and try to get that coordination as smoothly as possible and make sure we're all asking the right questions. And some of the biggest things are, ensuring the design sequence matches the control sequence. So even though we might have had a great design that had this amazing sequence of operation, can that control system actually do it? And that's where some of the point-to-point helps out, where we can see that sequence, those sequences are actually matching what you're asking for it to do in design. The control system is physically able to do. And like I said, one of the things that I find a lot, especially in educational facilities, are room numbers. For some reason, a lot of times the construction room numbers aren't matching the final room numbers that go into the school. And a lot of times the controls are designed based off the construction drawings. So they're referencing room numbers that might not be the same when the building's in operation. So these are things you want to make sure that when we're testing in the final condition that the room will be in. And like I said, and this comes the same thing when you're looking at terminal units. You want to make sure, that everything is in there. All your ceiling tiles are in. If you're doing ceiling tiles, your VRFs that are, you also have the manufacturer come in, do their startup, their programming. Sometimes you have, two separate controls. You might have individual equipment controls tied with system controls. So you want to make sure that coordination is done. And when we're actually testing, not only, that the overall manufacturer's control system is set up and start up, but the building-wide, BAS system, those points are reporting back, and that they're actually communicating with each other. So a lot of times I've worked on maybe some package units that might have a specific manufacturer controller where the overall school's BAS system is just maybe reading that point, turning it on or off. So prior to testing, you want to make sure that that coordination has happened, and make sure that even though you might only control the actual BAS system, you're able to run through all of the different sequences as designed. And if you need to have the manufacturer's control people there, you need to bring that there as well. So those are some of the things that I try to look at, when we say ready for testing. And it's never perfect. Every situation is different. However, it's one of those things that we try to keep a big eye on and try to coordinate as best as we can. Let's go to. So let's look at electrical, and same thing in the guideline part 2. So there's a part 1, and I'll back up a little bit. The part 1 is more about the process of commissioning, where part 2 we get into system specific. So we had the HVAC earlier, and now let's look at the electrical. And you have your power distribution, your emergency power distribution. You have your plug load control. You have your lighting. And these are things that we try to look at and we try to identify within the guideline. So let's talk about ready for testing when it comes to electrical. So engine generator, one of the big things I look at is like, hey, is everything installed? Labeling, dampers had the NFPA 110 test, is it compliant? Has the startup been done? Have we done a load test? Are the remote enunciator panels installed? Phase rotation verified. If this is the indoor test for an engine generator, the HVAC cooling and exhaust are ready. If it's a fuel oil system, is that connected? So one of the things we want to test the generator in its final condition. I've ran tests where, unfortunately the HVAC system, the exhaust system might not have been ready. So they wanted to test with the doors open to make sure, you didn't overheat the generator. However, this is not in that final condition. And then we had to come back when the HVAC system was ready. So in order to kind of reduce wasted trips, and then maybe some projects you might not have the luxury of being able to come back, and you don't have that 100% accuracy that when you're in an emergency that generator's going to work perfectly because of the other issues where you want to make sure your fuel oil, if you have a large system where you're going from tank to tank, you're moving the fuel oil around, or if you just want to make sure you don't overheat when it's in an enclosed space. And then, of course, you have your transfer switch. You want to make sure that vendor startup is completed. You want to make sure, it's connected to your generator. All that wiring is connected. That when you're sending your start-stop signal, that they're coordinated correctly. You want to make sure that the time delay has already been programmed. There's been multiple instances when I'm testing transfer switches that is still on that default, probably 30 minutes. And that's not always the case of what's needed, especially if you have multiple transfer switches where you might want to have different time delays versus if you have life safety coming back versus if you have like a standby power. So these are some of the bigger things that you want to make sure that you're looking at when you're going through everything. And like I said, you have your panel board testing. Like one of the big things we'll check is maybe we'll verify receptacles when we're actually doing the testing. But prior to that, I can tell you 90% of the time we're asking for, on panel boards, we're asking for, make sure the labeling is complete and the panel schedule is typed up and not handwritten. And almost every time I go out to do functional testing, that there's a handwritten note on there. Maybe they added some last minute changes to be connected in as-built. And of course, we have to document these issues and then maybe either through a picture or come back and verify. So these are things that we're just constantly seeing. And, so when someone says you're ready for testing and you ask, have all these things been completed? That's not typically, a lot of times that's not typically the case. So let's talk about lighting controls. Now, these things this is something, we see quite often, and pretty much almost every facility has some sort of lighting controls, even if it's just manual. But now lighting control is a lot more complicated, a lot more program intensive. You have different, you have different features that you're looking for. Sometimes you're including daylighting. So these are things that are very important to make sure that are done upfront before we actually get out to testing. So one of the big things I know, light fixtures are installed and working. There's been many times that all the light fixtures aren't in, and they still want you to test the programming to make sure, these things that we need to have the final conditions. Your occupancy sensor, your switches, all associated hardware installed and working. The fixtures and controls are operational, and contractors are confirmed operation. So that's the big thing, is before the commissioning provider gets out there, a lot of these operations should be confirmed. You want to make sure that you're able to dim it 50%, or if there's an emergency that the lights come on to 100%. You want to make sure the programming is done. A lot of times, and I understand for cost reasons, the contractors tend to bring the lighting programmers in one time, so they want to wait till the end. However, like if projects are phased, there's multiple testing opportunities, and those are things that we need to kind of be cognizant of, that if you want to turn over a phase early, then that area needs, at minimum, that area needs to be programmed. And a big thing is construction in that testing area is complete. So a lot of times when you're trying to test, it becomes very, I guess, very cumbersome or to test while, like if you're trying to test vacancy or occupancy, and there's people moving throughout the space doing other work for construction. So these are some of the biggest things that we run into, where we say, hey, are you really ready for testing? Your door, shades, all of that, everything that you're going to need to test the lighting needs to be installed and ready. And a lot of times shades are some of the last things that come on board as well, especially if there's specific shades manufacturer or controller. So these are things to avoid retests or delays. These should be ready before we go out there and test. And a lot of times these are located on our checklist to make sure those are completed. So if those are completed, most of the time these other steps are there. And then it's the same thing you get with daylighting. Daylighting, you want to make sure that you have the right daylighting zones. You want to make sure it's programmed correctly. So a big thing I've seen a lot of times is you have the photo cell either in the wrong location where you will never see the sunlight, or the wrong zone. So you're not affecting the ones by the window. You might be affecting ones farther out. So these are things that need to be kind of confirmed and should be checked prior to coming out for testing. And that's one of the big things, like I said, I see quite often when we're doing lighting controls testing. And like I said, for the most part, electrically, especially, we'll see, the panels, generators, lighting controls. And, sometimes we'll get, into, paralleling or stuff of that nature, but not too much in the educational facilities. So not ready for testing. Now, this is kind of my, one of the things I've seen, we see so often, and we're trying to get better. And like I said, the biggest thing is education for all parties involved to understand kind of where we need to be. So one of the things is, like when you are not ready for testing, if we can't get that testing done, because unfortunately, especially with educational facilities, a lot of times school has to start by a certain date, and that date is not movable. So one of the big things we have to do is work's not completed. We might have to come in while the facility is in operation, and that's no good for everyone. It involves extra trips. It involves less efficient testing, and it may be off-hour testing, and that of course can increase the budget as well. And also, issues can arrive during extreme temperature swings when the facility operation can be compromised. And this is where you get like those big winter storms in Texas, or the random winter storm or Texas, or a 110-degree day in the Northeast. So those things, but the problem is the systems aren't properly vetted for the system changeover, where a lot of times maybe we're testing in the summer, and so it's no way to test your boilers. So these are things that we need to kind of put a lot of thought into, where you're not only testing, you have to understand that you might have to come back and do some follow-up seasonal testing. And you also need to think about any of those conditions and maybe some flexibility within the programming if there's some drastic temperatures that come in. So those are some of the big things that I look at as well. And a higher number of complaints from a faculty and staff. Nothing's worse than having a new building or a new project within that building, and the space looks great, but then as soon as you're overheating or overcooling. So a lot of these things need to be ironed out prior to make sure that we're giving the client at the end of the day, and the people, the end users, the faculty and staff that are going to be in that building, to make sure that they have a properly vetted system. And like I said, and a lot of that comes from being ready to test. The value of and the value of the new work, overall feeling, you put all this work in for this new project, and and the first thing you get is hey, your light fixtures are not working. It kind of devalues the whole project. And then there's of course the possible impact on budget, and then and one of the biggest things is contractor participation. As you get further on in the project, and as the schedule gets pushed, people are going to other projects, and that last 3% becomes very difficult to close out. And of course, higher maintenance costs from facilities, like if school has to start, so there might be open issues that might not get to, and until those issues are addressed, I know the contractors are still liable to address those issues. But until they're completed, it's on your maintenance staff currently to have to deal with some of these issues that should have been vetted out prior to accepting the building. And we've, like one example, I had a RTU in the gas valve, and the gas line, we didn't have that size correctly, and it took over, I want to say about 4 or 5 months. And now we're getting into your heating season. You're getting into winter, and you're not able to heat correctly, and you have to come back, and so there was periods of uncomfort within that facility, because at the time we weren't ready. We weren't ready to truly test it, and when we found these issues, we weren't able to resolve it within time. And one of the big things is our graphical interfaces aren't complete at the time of testing. And these things, they'll go on, but if you have troubles, it's hard to really identify and kind of close out some of the trouble. And big thing is non-communication. And so that a lot of times when you're not ready for testing, that communication is never given back. So you'll have a commissioning provider make that trip only to find out, hey, we weren't ready, no one communicated back. So that's an additional expense. Or there's opportunities where maybe there's a holiday or something. If now you're trying to coordinate and work during the school time, there's school holiday or something that wasn't communicated, where their staff isn't available to let the team in. So it's just a lot of coordination that doesn't happen, and it all comes down to communication. So then you get more failed tests and retests, and then it results in workarounds where we're not able to maybe truly test the system once it's occupied, and we might have to look at pictures or trend data, where those are great as backups, but that shouldn't be, we should be able to fully test the system. And a lot of times, when you're not ready for testing during the original schedule, you're not meeting the full sequence operation. A lot of times when we're a little behind, we can make the building functional, but not truly operational based off of the design. And then you'll get in trouble when you might have those temperature swings where we made the building usable currently and had to go back and do it. So those are things that we run into quite often when we're going in there. And like I said, one of the big things that it becomes a domino effect is when you're not ready for testing and you're pushing the testing up until, you know, occupancy, there's not a good handoff for proper training. And this then leaves your facility kind of, and your maintenance staff, you know, a little behind the 8 ball, where they weren't able to be properly trained on the system to, you know, make sure, you know, hey, are there energy goals involved? How these systems work? How do you prioritize the alarms instead of just getting flooded with alarms? So where even though the system might have that capability, without actually having that handoff, because we were pushed to the last minute, you run into a lot of operational issues. So those are some of the things that we try to look at. That it's not the, you know, it's not the greatest. It's not the greatest way of doing things. So the goal from the guideline perspective is to try to document these issues, try to create these checklists, or not necessarily checklists, but some of the main prerequisites to help us get through where we can always be ready for testing. And I believe as much, you know, I like to say we don't give surprise tests. So all of our test procedures, all of the checklists, they're all provided to as early as possible to give everybody on page the ability to actually go through it. And these are, you know, these are some of the methods I've found successful where we're able to, you know, get buy-in early. We need to get the buy-ins from the owners. We need to not give that option that we're going to, you know, allow maybe to test with issues. You know, allow the test to be accepted with issues. You know, we need to get that buy-in early where, you know, this is important, you know, where commissioning, this time needs to be there. So we need to make sure we incorporate a lot of the commissioning activities into schedules. We need to make sure all of the training is there. You know, so these are things that a lot of times at the kickoff meeting I find is one of the most valuable places where we can get a lot of this testing done. And like I said, and I think the next thing I wanted to talk about is, you know, as schools and facilities have more energy mandates, it becomes more important than ever to get these things set up, to get the right trends set up. And a lot of times testing, you know, the testing gives you that initial baseline. So not only, you know, are we looking for, you know, the checklist to be completed, but the trends as well that are set up, and you have the right data. If you're looking at measuring EUI, if you're looking at measure, you know, how much, you know, your plug load, what metering data, if you're going for sustainability goals, if you're going for, you know, these are the type of things that we need to make sure that prior to testing, these things are already set up. So when you get that test data, you can see this is how the building is supposed to perform. So you can look at it, you know, a year later, 4 or 5 years later, to see how your building has been improving over time. But you can't, you're unable to see that unless you have that good baseline. And a lot of that stems from being ready for testing initially. So, and that's that. And these are things that are constantly evolving. As codes change, as requirements change, the guideline, we try to be as adaptive as possible to make sure that we're helping you. You know, so all of this information is available. And like I said, for building owners, for commissioning providers, you know, all of this information is free. You know, for ACG commissioning members, and then all facility owners, you know, educational owners, facility maintenance. You can reach out, and then we can give you the guideline to help. And that's our goal in the industry, is to try to just get us all on a kind of a level playing field where commissioning is not a painful process. And I think, you know, it's in everyone's best interest to kind of look at some of the tools and the documentations that we currently have to help. So I'm going to kind of, you know, take any questions right now. And if there are, you know, if there's not, then we can go over some more examples, but I do want to give time for any questions that we might have for this presentation.
Okay, well, if anyone has questions, they can type them into the chat box as usual. We have one question to get us started. When selecting terminology language of ready for testing, was it considered to include the word functionally, as in ready for functional testing?
No, so like I said, ready for testing, and we try to follow kind of the ASHRAE standard. So yeah, functional testing is I guess a subset of testing, and you're testing the functionality. But there's different type of testing. You know, as you're going, you know, you have like if you're doing a whole building or enclosure testing, you might have building pressurization testing. You know, so it's kind of depending on the type of system that you're doing and what testing you're doing. So we tried to leave the who's ready for testing, the more testing is general, but yeah, functional testing would be kind of a subset. And most of our systems that we see today, you know, we are going to do some form of functional testing.
Okay. Right now, that's the only question we had in the chat box. You've given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure you'll be hearing from people as follow-up. So let's give them just a few minutes to, we want to add some more questions here. And can you tell me a little bit about the, I understand you have some webinars that are coming up in the near future. Can you talk a little bit about those?
Yeah, so like I said, I think I'll go back to, you know, we have there's the Essential CX webinars, so those should be starting up, coming up throughout the summer, and basically, I believe every Thursday they'll be coming up, and the registration is free. And then we also have that CX Energy Conference 2025 in Charlotte. So those are some of the big things that we have upcoming, and they'll be on, I believe, a monthly basis starting in July.
Okay, well, I don't see any other questions in our chat box, so I'm going to say, Charles, thank you so much for, here we go. Okay. They're coming in now.
No worries.
It says, let's say that as a CX provider, we did our due diligence to communicate expectations on what it means to be ready for testing, but they still weren't ready. How do we address the issue of ASRs or change orders without being too demanding on the client? It's always a tough topic, and many clients scoff at the idea of change orders.
Oh, yeah, it's one that we deal with quite often. You know, unfortunately, you know, there's always the give and take. But the biggest thing I say is the advocacy of the owner from the beginning, and to show the importance of, you know, like these are things that we document where we try to say, hey, we're coming out there, maybe one retest, and you know, we try to kind of set those limits and show why, and have that documentation to prove it, like where that's where, hey, they're ready for testing. We had the contractors fill out all of the forms that said they're ready. We came out there, we made the trip. The system was not ready for testing. We made a retest. And these are things, so where we try to put those language in, you know, some of the language we try to put into the original proposal, where, you know, one test and maybe, you know, a certain number of retests, or we had that conversation quite early with the owner, like how do we want to proceed going forward if we have to continue to incur additional costs. So I think the big thing is kind of the advocacy from the owner and bringing it up prior to it becoming the issue for testing. So these discussions need to be had and kind of vetted out prior to us, you know, probably at that beginning of the project before it becomes that sore subject at the end. And that's what I've found successful.
Okay. Someone is asking, do you have, oh, it bounced on me. Apologize.
No worries.
Is there a monthly working group for ongoing CX issues?
So we have, I'm trying to, I guess, in what context? I'm trying to think. Like I said, I know we have, are you talking about per individual project? Are you talking about ACG in specifically? So I guess I know we have a commissioning guideline committee that we meet bi-weekly kind of to go over, different articles and, kind of what's new in there. I know on projects, we have our monthly commissioning meetings, depending on the duration of project, where we kind of, it becomes monthly, bi-weekly, weekly, depending on the schedule, where we review issues. So I'm not sure either of those ask the question, but I know for kind of commissioning issues overall, it depends on the project.
Okay, well, I'll have the person asking the question see if they can expand the question just a little bit more. Our next question is, how do you coordinate, optimize, ready to testing when several systems are tied into a building automation system?
And that's kind of always the fun challenge, but these are the things that we need. A lot of times we need to have everyone aware. So like simple occupancy controls, easy one, where sometimes that's tied, the occupancy is tied into your terminal units, because so you want to make sure your mechanical contractor, so it's making sure getting all the trades that are required, even if they might have minimal need on that one thing, but getting them all coordinated and bringing them together, especially like when we're going through the testing, either functional or even when we're going through the integrated testing. So it's more the coordination between the trades and kind of documenting. A lot of times I like to kind of bring out, when we're doing certain tests, which contractors are needed, which systems that might be affected, and how we need to coordinate together to make sure that we're successful in getting the test completed and resolved.
Okay. Our next question is, does it make sense to bring up this clarity in the proposal or in the kickoff meeting? I fear that the proposal may scare off a potential client if it's a competitive RFP.
Well, so and I think it does make sense to, like I said, we've done it where most of the time we try to bring it in a proposal where we limit to one retest, and then we'll put in a note any additional retest might be occurred, or or something like that, and we have that option to bring it up. So I think bringing it up, and if you are, I guess, like I said, my preference is always to bring it up and kind of document it, where you kind of want to put yourself ahead of the game, but it might also be a contact maybe before the kickoff meeting, but maybe directly with the owner, kind of, hey, these are our expectations and maybe how you want to go about it. So my preference is always to kind of put it in writing, where we kind of, if we need to enforce it, we don't always have to use it. But if it does incur costs, we can kind of bring it there. But like I said, it becomes touchy, and only you would know how that different project or that different bid might be. But either way, it's good to have that maybe a direct conversation with the owner. And my past experience on projects similar to this, these are what we run into, and these are things that we're just trying to look at avoiding ahead of time.
Well, that's the end of our questions, so I'm going to try and give people 15 minutes back of their day. So, Charles, thank you so much for the informative presentation today. And as always, to our attendees, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us. So until next time, be safe, stay healthy, and let's be kind to one another. Thank you.